Scott, I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the senator from Oregon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for putting this hearing together. And I'm struck about the similarity between what you're all presenting here, what is presented before the China Commission, which both then Senator Rubio and I had turns in chairing, and what came in the last September in the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. Perhaps we'll see all of you at the third annual gathering of that here in September. And some of the things you mentioned just continues to strike a chord. Ms. Su, that lighting a candle is a crime. That suggests how dramatically Hong Kong has changed. And Ms. Richardson, your support for investigating crimes against humanity that China is involved in, including against the Uyghurs, and I co-wrote the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. I would like to see other countries adopt a similar presumed assumption that things that are made in certain areas of China have been made with slave labor. We have a safe harbor for companies can prove that it's not, but it's really, I think, the only effective answer, and only America's taken it. So we see goods rejected here shipped to Canada, which is unacceptable. Ms. Enos, your 21 recommendations. And Ms. Gallagher, your fierce conversation about the inhumanity of the way that Mr. Lai has been treated. His son Sebastian has come up here repeatedly, and along with others, to keep making that case. There are two bills that this committee, and I think, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned them in your opening remarks, so I wasn't here. Well, the Hong Kong Judicial Sanctions Act, with Senator Sullivan and Curtis and myself are leading it. Mandate sanctions on Hong Kong judicial officials complicit in human rights abuses. Do any of you support that, getting that done? I see nodding heads across the board. The second is the Stop CCP Money Laundering Act. Senator Curtis and I are co-leading that. And one of you mentioned money laundering as a significant factor. Does anyone see any reason not to proceed with getting that passed? Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate your suggestion that if our failure to pass legislation out of foreign relations on Hong Kong would be an implicit statement about our lack of concern. I don't want that to happen. So I hope we'll build on the foundation of those bills and many of the ideas that are presented here today to proceed. One thing that has really troubled me is the persistent business activity that Hong Kong has so valiantly tried to sustain and to give themselves cover. And of course, it's kind of a key vulnerability if companies were to translocate. Is there any sort of strategy in the works to try to move the financial operations, firms that participate, and say it's really unacceptable to be locating and contributing to what China has done in Hong Kong? Ms. Enos?
It's not business as usual in Hong Kong, and we all know this here, but I think many businesses would prefer to look the other way. We have to make it so that they can't look the other way. And this is a huge part of the reason why I have long advocated for a primary money laundering concern designation, especially for subsets of transactions or specific institutions, because that has the potential to shift risk. And we know this because a primary money laundering concern designation was used against North Korea, and the banks said, oh my goodness, we're not going to touch Banco Delta Asia once it had that primary money laundering concern designation issued. We need to start doing that for Hong Kong because businesses are continuing to buy the propaganda from John Lee and others that Hong Kong is just fine. But we know that they are actively supporting Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, that they're actively supporting other rogue actors like Iran and North Korea. And we know this because of a fabulous report that Sam Bickett did called Beneath the Harbor, which I would encourage, if it's possible, to submit that entire report to the record, if it's possible.
Mr. Chairman, we ask that the report be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to weigh in on this? Thank you.
Yes, just in relation to business, Senator Merkley, it's very important to say I briefly referred to what happened to Apple Daily. And what's happened with Apple Daily is state-sponsored theft of a hugely successful business. So as well as being, of course, a real blow to press freedom, it's also a real cautionary tale for the over 1,300 US businesses which currently operate in Hong Kong, the 84,000 US citizens currently based in Hong Kong, because so vaguely defined are the offences under the national security law that anyone who's operating in that environment is at real risk. And what I would also say is that what we see with Hong Kong is it essentially becoming a bay of broken promises, a safe harbour for human rights violators, and it's essentially an authoritarian regime masquerading as a free market, free trade hub, finest laundromat for cleaning money in the East. And I'm always struck by those very powerful words which former Congressman Mike Gallagher used, where he described golden blindfolds being worn by individuals staring out the windows of their glass offices onto Victoria Harbour. And I think it's really critical because we know how important it is to Hong Kong and to China to have Hong Kong seen as a place where it's safe to do business. And we must keep calling out the fact that in its current guise, it is not a safe place to do business. And could I also ask that we read into the record, there's a very powerful piece which was recently written by the Committee to Protect Journalists on why what's happening under the national security law in eroding press freedom is also bad for business. It's from the 30th of June, and they pointed out that actually Hong Kong's economic boom happened because journalists could work without interference, and that what you now have is fading financial appeal in part because of Hong Kong trying to continue being seen as an international financial centre in circumstances where it has such gross restrictions on information and such a crackdown on press freedom. So it's bad for press freedom, it's also bad for business.
Mr. Chairman, can we put that report in the record? And could I follow up one point here? I know I'm over time. So as we think about the manufacturing that goes on with the Uyghurs in China, we're able to say to companies, consider moving to Vietnam. Not that their human rights record is perfect, but we're continuing to work closely with Vietnam and hopefully to see a much better situation there than with the Uyghurs, or other places in Asia that have the potential for the same sort of manufacturing. But is there an alternative for the financial center in Hong Kong where we can say to a business, you could be in Kuala Lumpur, or could be where, in other words, is it partly that there's no like magnet alternative that keeps these big companies doing their financial business in Hong Kong? Is there not a feasible alternative?
I'll try to answer both those questions. Olivia will do a better job on the alternative location question. But Senator Merkley, just very quickly, first of all, thank you for all of your hard work with the CECC. But the story of the last 40 years involves a lot of US business activity and money flowing into China as the Chinese government got progressively more repressive. And as extraordinary an accomplishment as the UFLPA is, it should not have taken credible allegations of crimes against humanity and genocide to get us to that point.
Yes.
You know, we've had 40 years of occasionally a story floats up that, you know, X American company has been found using forced labor, or, you know, Y company is dealing with labor unrest inside China. What are we waiting for? These variables, I think, are extremely clear, and that unless and until US companies and any companies are required to show that they are not part of the problem, we're going to keep having this conversation, and we'll only be able to pass laws when the situation has gotten exponentially worse than it should have. You know, this is not the direction everybody wanted to convince themselves we were going in post-Tiananmen. The argument was, let businesses invest, people will make money, repression will lessen, it'll all get better. That's not how it's turned out. Thank you.
I'm so glad Sophie raised UFLP. I have lots of thoughts on that, but I won't address that. I'll go ahead and address, I think Singapore has been offered as a credible alternative. It has its drawbacks because it's very close with China and the CCP, but that has been the one that has come up most frequently. I think, though, we should be encouraging folks to just be more focused on like the UK and the US, which are the stronger financial centers to be focused on at this particular juncture. And I think that that should be an area of focus. I believe in the resilience of the market. I believe that businesses can be agile and can change directions. They're just choosing willfully to look the other way in the face of, as Sophie pointed out, just incredible evidence of ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity for Uyghurs, the near dissolution of freedom overnight in Hong Kong. I mean, it's fairly breathtaking over the last several years. So I think we're beyond the point of kind of saying, it's okay, businesses, you just didn't know. They absolutely know and are continuing to look the other way.
I would love to see a press story in which 25 major financial companies all together say we are moving to Singapore, and we're doing it 6 months from now if X, Y, and Z don't change. We need some kind of shockwave to change the dynamic.
Well, and it's going to require folks like Jamie Dimon of, JP Morgan and Chase, who's continuing to underwrite, public offerings for Hong Kong companies to say, I'm not doing that anymore. We can't verify this because the rule of law is so undermined. And they have to stop coming when John Lee invites them for big, flashy business conferences where there's just tons of executives lining up.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
waiting
Great line of questioning.